Hi there. So after a long hiatus due to COVID-19, F1 2020 is finally underway at the Red Bull Ring. I thought I would make this video to explain how I would set up a high downforce race car for the Red Bull Ring. So if we look at the track layout of... Hello there. In my day job, I create control software for active suspension systems, and with this channel, I aim to demystify racetrack setup, whether that's for sim racing or any other form of motorsport. Just a second, let me just rewind a bit. In general, I have very fond memories of the what was then called the A1 ring. Back when I was playing Electronic Arts F1 2002, shows how old I am. So F1 2002 was where I got started in sim racing many years ago, and that A1 ring was really popular with all the newbies because the layout is quite easy to remember and it's quite a short lap, and so it was quite a fun track to race at. So in all the public lobbies you would see many races happening at the A1 ring. It was a very fun track, but the thing is quite often you would see huge pileups at turn one. Maybe even more so than at other tracks, because there's the wall on the inside, and so because it's quite a blind corner, people tend to underestimate how tight it is. So you'd see people, running way too far into the gravel on the outside, or people further back in the pack just slamming into people in front. So if you could make it through the chaos at turn one, then you had a good chance of having a good race. And the track itself is quite fun. I would say there are a few tricky turns. I would say the most tricky ones are 9, 10, and 1. So 1, I already explained why, so due to the fact that it's blind. The fact that you're also just coming off the brakes and then having to turn in because it was quite hard braking. So if you don't time the transition from braking to turning in properly, then you can induce quite a bit of understeer, which also doesn't help. So that's the tricky part about turn 1. In terms of turn 9 and turn 10, the reason they are tricky is because turn 9 is a very fast turn. It's quite easy to be overconfident and run too wide, and then once you run too wide, then you're just lost because you cannot then make it through turn 10. And if you have made it successfully through turn 9, then the thing with turn 10, so the very last turn, is so this is turn 10. The tricky thing with this is that in order to get the best lap time, you really have to ride the inside curb. But at least back in F1 2002, there was a wall really close to the inside. So if your setup didn't allow you to place the car very accurately, you might actually slam into the wall on the inside. And if you don't have that problem, then if your car setup wasn't good, the curb might upset your car, spit you out on the exit, or you might spin out because the car is unsettled. So what you've noticed is that at both turn 1, turn 9, and turn 10, you really need to ride the curbs hard. So that's a crucial aspect to getting a good setup at this track. The fact that you have very good distinction between the slow corners and fast corners means that you can really use the aero to give the car different handling characteristics at low and high speeds. So for example, in order to ride the curbs well, you might want to, and have the car very stable as you come back on the power, you might want to soften the rear anti-roll bar which will make the car understeer at low speeds, but make the car quite stable and not as easy to spin out. So if you make the rear anti-roll bar stiffer, then the car will be less understeered at low speeds. But when riding curbs and then getting back on the power just as you come off the curbs, you are more likely to spin out the car. So the solution to that, I would say, is to live with a small amount of understeer at the low speed corners, at least in terms of the vehicle stiffness balance, but avoid understeer in the high speed corners using aero balance. So then with the wings on the car, you can balance out the car so that you don't have the understeer for the high speed corners. So that's in general the approach I would take. Plus, I would say the general downforce level at a one ring or Red Bull ring nowadays is quite high, because there's where you're making the lap time is, I would say, up on the uphill. I mean, okay, over the entire lap you're making up the lap time, but if you think about what are the crucial corners, I would say it's the entire middle section, then the final turn, and the uphill blast to turn 3. But then the straights, I would say, are quite slow, not quite slow, but quite short, relatively speaking. And there's a relatively large proportion of high-speed corners compared to the length of the straights that you have. So in general, you have quite a high downforce. And in terms of gearing, the crucial corners to get your gearing correct for are the hairpin, so turn 3, as well as the high-speed corners. So it might mean that you don't end up with a very even spacing between all the gears, from the lowest up to the highest. But you might want to do that in order to optimize your lap time, because it's important that as you go through the fast corners and as you exit the hairpin, that you're in the optimum power band of the engine, rather than have theoretically the most even spread between all the gears. Besides that, I would say it's important to remember that the needs in terms of brake bias for the hairpin is different from most of the other corners. So for the hairpin, you would typically need quite a forward brake bias, due to the fact that there's a lot of forward longitudinal load transfer, which means that to minimize the braking distance, you want a lot of front brake bias. But a lot of front brake bias will result in braking induced understeer, and that is absolutely what you don't want for a lot of the high-speed corners. So if you're braking for, say, the high-speed corners, just brushing the brake a little bit to reduce the understeer to help with the turn-in, then you definitely want the brake bias to be more towards the rear. And interestingly, if you watch the pole lap, onboard pole lap from Valtteri Bottas from 2018, you do notice Bottas playing with the brake bias. So you cannot really see it in the 2017 video or in some of the other pole lap videos through the years, but 2018 is really good, because you have a very good camera angle, and the LCD display of his steering wheel is illuminated. You can really see it. So coming out of turn 1, blasting uphill towards the hairpin, you will see Bottas change his brake bias. I can almost guarantee you, to the front, in order to minimize braking distance for the hairpin. But then for the rest of the lap, he needs more brake bias towards the rear, and then as he comes out of the hairpin, going towards number turn 4, he changes his brake bias backwards. And then so for all the rest of the corners, say turn 4, and then all the high speed stuff, he has more brake bias towards the rear, because there it's more important to avoid any understeer. And with that, I believe we have gone through all the points. So let me just bring up my cheat sheet. So I think we mentioned everything. So it's a high downforce track due to the short straights and fast corners. We have the clear distinction between fast and slow corners, so we can use the arrow to give different handling behavior for low and high speed corners. In order to ride the curbs and have good traction out of the hairpin and slow corner exits, I would most likely use relatively soft rear anti-roll bar, and then solve the high speed handling balance using arrow. We mentioned the different brake bias and the fact that the gearing needs to be focused on the hairpin and the fast corners. And finally, in terms of driving, the braking for turn 1 and 3 are all uphill, so gravity is helping you, so you can actually brake a little bit later than normal. And the hard braking for turn 4, that is downhill, and especially if the brake bias has been moved backwards a bit to avoid the understeer, that also contributes to a slightly longer braking distance. So that, along with the fact that it's downhill, means that you need to brake a little bit earlier for turn 4. So I believe that's it. Try and see if you can spot the drivers playing and changing their brake bias during qualifying, maybe even the race, and enjoy the Grand Prix.